Hi, welcome to this Blender video tutorial entitled DecalImageTextures. A common problem faced when using image textures is the need to add one image texture on top of another image texture. This is sometimes referred to as decaling. To demonstrate DecalImageTextures, I've placed in my Blender scene a plane object. I'm using the default camera and the default lamp, but I've added a second hemi-lamp at the very low energy level to fill some of the shadows. I've also split my 3D viewport so that the rendering will appear in the right window. I'll select the plane object and click on the Material Context button, which displays the material editor. I'll click on the New button and name this material Plane Bricks. I'll then click on the Texture Context button, which will display the texture editor. I'll click on the New button. I'll click on the Type button and select Image or Movie as the texture type. I'll then click on the Open button and select the brickwall.jpg image from my desktop and click on the Open button. In the Image Mapping panel, I will set the X and Y repeat to 3 and checkmark both mirror boxes so that the texture tiling will be reasonably smooth. I'll then render the scene. We now have an image texture of a brick wall. I'll name this texture Brick Wall. We can see all of the linking of the data in the Outliner panel. The plane has a mesh called Mesh, which in turn is linked to a material called Plane Bricks, which in turn has a texture called Brick Wall, which in turn has an image file named brickwall.jpg. To add a second image texture on top of the first, I'll select the second texture slot and press the New button and choose Image or Movie as the texture type. I'll name this texture Danger. I'll then click on the Open button and select the Danger PNG file located on my desktop and click on the Open button. I'll then render the scene. Notice that the second texture named Danger renders over the first texture named Brick Wall. If I uncheck the Danger texture in the texture list and re-render, the brick wall is rendered. Blender renders textures in the texture list from top to bottom. Now there are two general methods for decaling textures. One is to use UV mapping instead of the default generated Blender mapping. To demonstrate this UV mapping, I'll first select the Danger texture and checkmark the Danger texture in the texture list so that it will render. Next I'll go to the UV image editor, which I already have open in the right 3D viewport window. Here I will select the danger.png image file from the Browse ID Data drop-down box. I'll move my cursor to the 3D editor window and press the Tab button to enter edit mode. With all the plane vertices selected, I'll click on the Mesh button in the 3D viewport header and select UV Unwrap, then Unwrap. This unwraps the plane mesh in the UV image editor. Now, since the plane mesh consists of one simple face, it's displayed as a box with 4 vertices. I'll press the A key to select all of the vertices, and press the S key and scale the plane face up. I'll continue to do this until the danger.png image is in a proper proportion to the plane face. This will have the effect of resizing the danger.png image in the final rendering. I'll then press the G key and position the plane face so that the danger PNG image is in the upper right corner of the plane. Now if you look closely, you'll see that one of the edges of the plane is red in color. This is actually the bottom edge of the plane's face. In the UV editor, it's now at the top. I'll press the R key, which is rotate, followed by 180 and press enter. This rotates the plane 180 degrees, and now the bottom of the plane is located at the bottom of our UV mapping. I'll then tab out of edit mode and return the UV image editor to the render result. Now back in the mapping panel, with the danger texture still selected, I'll change the mapping from generated to UV. Now note that the brick wall texture is still using the Blender generated flat mapping. I'll then render the scene. Note that the danger image is now smaller, however, because it is still set to repeat, it's tiled. I'll go to the image mapping panel and set the extension from repeat to clip. I'll then render the scene. The danger texture is now decaled on top of the brick wall texture. Now another way to do this is to link the material texture to an empty object and place the empty object on the surface of the other object. In my 3D editor, I'll select the plane object and press Shift-S and snap my cursor to the selected. This centers my 3D cursor at the plane's object origin. I'll then add an empty object to the scene. I'll name this empty object No War Empty. I'll then select the plane and go to the texture editor. I'll click on the third texture slot and add a new texture. I'll select Image or Movie as the texture type. I'll name this new texture No War. I'll press the Open button and select the nowar.png image located on my desktop and press the Open button. I'll scroll down to the image mapping panel and change the extension from repeat to clip so that the texture is not repeated. Then, in the mapping panel, I'll change the mapping coordinates from generated to object. I'll click in the object box and select the No War Empty object as the mapping coordinates. In my 3D editor window, I will turn off the Translate widget and select the No War Empty object. Notice that the Z-axis of the empty object is pointing straight up. By default, object mapping in Blender will be placed along this Z-axis. To make the image appear on the front of the plane, I will first press the R key, followed by the Y key, followed by 90, and then Enter. This will rotate the empty so that the Z-axis is facing outward. I'll then go to the top view and rotate the empty so that its X and Y axis aligns with the plane's X and Y axis. I'll then press the G key and move the empty a little in front of the plane object. I'll then render the scene. Note that the No War texture is rotated on its side and has a white line around it. Now to align the No War texture, I'll select the empty and then press the R key followed by the Z key twice to get local orientation, followed by 90 and then Enter. This will rotate the empty 90 degrees around the local Z axis. I'll then render the scene. The No War texture is now right side up, but it has this white line around it. Now this often happens when the decaled image has a transparent background, as this PNG image does. The solution for this, and I have to admit I have no idea why it is so, but it's to checkmark the pre-multiply checkbox located in the image panel. I will do this, and I'll re-render the scene. Now the No War texture is decaled, along with the danger texture, on the brick wall texture. If we look at the outliner panel, we can see that the plane object has a linked mesh, which has a material named Plane Bricks, that has three textures: brick wall, danger, and No War. Each of them has an associated image file.